this really harsh, occupation. Anyway, so the way the Jews reacted to Jesus, I said they're incredibly well received, and then they even wanted to make Jesus the king. So when the people saw the sign, the feeding the 5,000, which he'd done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving they're about to come and take him by force to make him the king, Jesus withdrew. I think he got on a boat and went over the Galilee. So that was, again, the kind of impact that he was making. And then after this, Jesus asked his disciples, Who do you say I am? Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. Why not? So why did Jesus say this to the disciples? Don't go around telling people I'm the Messiah. So often we think that's what you should be doing. But actually Jesus said, don't do that. The reason is because the Messianic mission, the Messiah, as I said and explained, was God's anointed one, and also called God's Son, and comes to bring blessings from God. This is just a traditional Jewish understanding of the Messiah, the role and function of the Messiah, and also to establish God's kingdom on the earth, and also to destroy Israel's enemies, to bring about peace and justice, and then to rule the whole world. That's a vision in Isaiah, that all the nations of the world will come to the temple in Jerusalem, and the Messiah then would be the ruler of justice. And the Romans knew what the Messiah meant. They weren't idiots. They knew, Messiahs, this is what Messiahs do. Their job is to destroy Israel's enemies. Who's Israel's enemy today? It's us. So if we come across somebody who's claiming to be, or is being proclaimed as the Messiah, our job then is to arrest this person and have him put to death. And that's what the Romans did to Messiahs. They executed quite a few of them. I looked at some of them a bit earlier on. Anyway, so later on then, Jesus goes into Jerusalem, after 3 years of ministry up until then, been incredibly well received, generally speaking, amongst the Jewish people. And as he came into Jerusalem, then this is what I think was a big mistake was made. They proclaimed, as he came in on the donkey, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." So who has the authority to decide who is the king of Israel? The Romans. They're the occupying power. They're the ones who appointed Herod the Great to become the king. They're the ones who appointed one of Herod's sons, King Herod Antipas. They're the ones who had the authority to appoint the high priest. So if somebody gets proclaimed by the people as the king of Israel, obviously this is the person who's leading an uprising to try and overthrow the Romans and to make Israel an independent country again, where he is the king. So Jesus then, he went into Jerusalem. On the gates of Jerusalem, you have policemen and you have soldiers and guards. That's just the way it is. And so if you're a guard, a soldier, a Roman soldier, or a policeman standing outside the gates of Jerusalem, and someone enters in with a huge crowd of people being proclaimed as the king of the Jews, the king of Israel, and of course you report back to your officer, and it works its way up through the hierarchy. Then the people in charge have to decide, what are we going to do with this person who's come to try and overthrow us? What would they do in this country? Well, in days gone by, they used to arrest them. They don't do much of that these days. So the Pharisees said to one another, "Look how the whole world has gone after him." So the Pharisees are incredibly impressed. Jesus himself, as I'll explain about later, was basically a Pharisee, and they were impressed. The whole world has gone after him. Just the Jewish people, obviously. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. It wasn't just ordinary. People sometimes think it's just ordinary folk who followed Jesus and believed in Jesus. But actually the Gospels say that even the leaders of the Jewish people believed in him after only 3 years. So these are some of them. There's Joseph of Arimathea, who I talked about before. Probably Jesus' uncle. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. So the Sanhedrin was the highest court in Israel, the highest Jewish court. So it's equivalent to, being like a high court judge in this country, or in a Catholic church being a cardinal. That kind of level and stature within the Jewish community had a member of the Sanhedrin. He was also a very wealthy man. As I said, he was a tin trader. There's Nicodemus. He was also a member of the Sanhedrin, an incredibly significant and powerful person within Jewish society, and he was a Pharisee. There's Gamaliel. Gamaliel was the leader of the Pharisees. The leader of the Pharisees. And so after the death of Jesus, when some of the disciples are brought before the Sanhedrin to be, judged because they were preaching about Jesus, then Gamaliel said, if he's from God, then there's no point in trying to stop him. If he's not from God, it'll collapse anyway. Just let them get on with it and do what they want to do. So he himself obviously had a huge amount of respect for Jesus, and the early church regards him as having become a follower of Jesus. He's the leader of the Pharisees. Another one who's mentioned in the Gospels is Jairus. He was a leader of the synagogue. His daughter was very ill, and so Jesus actually, healed his daughter. That's why he's mentioned there. There was someone called Joanna. She was the wife of Herod's steward, Chusa. So that's Herod Antipas, the one who had John executed. So the wife of his steward was a very important person. Was again one of the followers of Jesus. So that's the kind of stature of people. Those are just the ones that are mentioned in the Gospel. There are probably lots of other ones as well, I would imagine. So that's how Jesus went into Jerusalem, and he went to preach in the temple. But then, as I said, the high priest was appointed by the Roman authorities. He was given that job to maintain order within Israel. So Britain, we used to have a large empire. We didn't rule directly. We would find some of the natives who we could rule through. Yeah, it's much easier for the locals to do what one of their own people is telling them to do than to have to pay any attention to these arrogant British people who are telling them what to do. The Romans ruled in the same sort of way. So they would appoint the high priest, and it was his job. I'll talk about that later. Anyway, the chief priests and elders gathered when they heard about Jesus coming into Israel, into Jerusalem. The chief priests and the elders gathered and took counsel to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, not during the feast, lest there be a tumult among the people. So they realized Jesus was so popular preaching in the temple that if they went to arrest him, then there'd be a huge uprising, not against the Romans, but a huge uprising against them, because he was so welcome and so popular. And the question is then, well, why did the high priests and the chief priests want to do this to Jesus? Why did they want to arrest him and have him put to death? It explains it very clearly in the Gospel of John. They said, this was the conversation they had, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy our holy place, the temple, and our nation. There was a real and present danger. It's actually what happened in the end. So Caiaphas said, he was the high priest, it is expedient that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation should not perish. So they thought, if we cut the head off, the snake's head, or if we cut off the leader, then the whole thing will dissolve away. We don't need to worry. So they thought the best thing to do then to protect the temple, protect the nation, is to arrest Jesus and have him put to death. If you were the high priest, what would you do? In this situation, what would you do? Difficult one, isn't it? That's the political reality that the high priest was reading. This is how things might turn out if we're not careful. How can we prevent this disaster from coming? This is the only way we can do it. Arrest the leader of this, what he would presumably think of as a terrorist organization. Freedom fighters or whatever, trying to lead this revolution, this uprising. So, something I'm not going to talk about, but anyway, the problem was Caiaphas and the high priest and the chief priests, they didn't know Jesus. They didn't know who he was. They'd never met him. They hadn't heard encountered him. They just heard rumors about him. So there should have been, hi, welcome back. So, oh, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I should have shut up. They're just so nice to see you again. I was wondering where. Anyway, so, okay, so who should have introduced Jesus to and told the chief priest and the high priest about Jesus? No, Joseph was already dead. John the Baptist. Because John the Baptist, his dad, Zechariah, was a priest, one of the chief priests. I don't know how high he was. Maybe the high priest, I don't know. I mean, the suggestion that he was.
I understand that there were different high priests every year.
Not every year. Caiaphas was there for about 10 years. It just... Anyway, it was... It changed after the Roman occupation, and the Romans wanted to have more and more control. And so if there was a high priest who didn't cooperate with the Romans, then they got fired. And then the Romans would only allow someone to remain the high priest if they cooperated. And their job was to be the head of the police. So that the high priest had his own police force, and his job was to have his ears to the ground, to be aware of any resistance that was going on, to have that person arrested, tried, and if necessary, passed on to the Roman authorities to be tried again and executed. And so, so John the Baptist, and if John the Baptist had followed Jesus, because John the Baptist obviously had connections in the temple, because his dad was probably a high priest or chief priest, then he, as a leading disciple of Jesus, then he could have gone to the high priest and said, look, Caiaphas, this is what Jesus is like. He's not trying to overthrow the Romans. He's trying to solve the problem, which I'll talk about later. And then he could have diffused the situation. But Jesus didn't have anybody who had a connection to the high priest. There's no one to be that bridge. That was John's job, was to be the bridge. Yeah. Well, they weren't Pharisees. They were Pharisees. They weren't in the priesthood. So there was the priests, and the Pharisees were very critical of the priests, and the way the temple was run. And there were different groups. I'll look at those groups in a minute. So, yeah. So even if they spoke, anyway. So look at some of these religious groups. So Jesus then came into conflict with some religious leaders. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would to go in. So there's a big controversy and argument. You probably heard the expression, 3 Jews, 4 opinions. Yeah, that's all they do is they argue. Jonathan Sacks, who was the he was the chief rabbi of Britain and the Commonwealth for many years, nearly 20 years. He said, being the chief rabbi is the hardest job in the world, he said. Do you know why? No idea. Because everybody thinks they're a chief rabbi. All the other rabbis think they're the chief rabbi as well, and they're always arguing and criticizing me. When he writes a book, they write critiques of his books and things like that. It's just the way it is. It's what they do. You can see it now in Israel itself. Netanyahu is doing what he's doing, and they've got half the population against him, and demonstrations, and the whole thing is just a huge uproar all the time. It's just the way it is. Anyway, so there's this uproar 2,000 years ago. So who are these religious groups? Well, there's the Sadducees. These are the ruling aristocratic priestly group and who became collaborators of the Romans. So they were the aristocrats, and they were the ones who produced the priests and the ruling class in Israel. So when the Romans invaded, then the Sadducees, who were the aristocratic ruling class, had to decide what are we going to do. If we refuse to cooperate with the Romans, they're going to come and confiscate our houses, our property, our land, and we're going to lose our social status. So they decided to cooperate and to collaborate with the Romans and tried to be, And they would explain it in the way that people like this explain it. We'll be the mediators. We'll soften this harsh Roman rule and we'll try to make it work, basically. So they were collaborators. And so the priests then, the high priests, the chief priests, they were collaborators. There's also the Pharisees. They were popular, democratic. They're the ones who established the synagogues, which is for education. They weren't involved in the temple at all. They would go there to worship, but they would establish the synagogues. They're also the source of the oral Torah and all the debates and discussions. So after the destruction of the temple, this whole class, the Sadducees, are wiped out, or they lost. There's no temple anymore, so there's no priests anymore, so that was the end of that particular group within Judaism. And then the Pharisees, who weren't connected that way, they had the synagogues all throughout the Roman Empire and elsewhere. They're the ones who became modern Judaism. Also the Essenes, this is a breakaway priestly group near the Dead Sea, so they didn't like the way that the Sadducees are cooperating with the Romans. They thought there was too much corruption within the temple, so they went off and they set up their own community near the Dead Sea, and so in the hope that one day they would come and, replace the existing Sadducees. There's also the Zealots. These were nationalist freedom fighters against Roman rule. So from time to time they'd go and attack some Roman soldiers, and when you're dealing with the Romans, there's no point in doing that. It's a complete waste. So basically, this is the way it is. If you get occupied by a foreign power, become part of somebody else's empire, you have to decide, how am I going to deal with it? Am I going to collaborate? And I'm going to try and set myself away and not get involved? Am I going to go away like a hermit? Or am I going to become a freedom fighter? Everyone has to decide how we're going to deal with this kind of reality. Koreans also, they had to deal with this reality. The Japanese occupation, and you're living in Korea, how do you deal with it? Do you collaborate? Do you fight against it? Do you try and ignore it? Do you emigrate, refugee or something? Everyone, that's life. And so these are the different ways in which different groups responded. And so, so what's going on? So it's not a conflict between Jesus and the Jews. Sometimes it looks like that when you read the New Testament, but actually it's just a conflict between Jesus, who was born, lived and died, a practicing Jew, and all Jesus' followers were Jews, and the early church were Jews who believed in Jesus. They were Jewish Christians. They're Christian Jews. They were Jews who were Christians, believed in Jesus, believed Jesus the Messiah. Most Jews, for various reasons, didn't. Conflicts in the Gospels then are a conflict between Jews. The Pharisees were liberal, reforming Jews who became the leaders of Judaism after 70 AD, as I said. And Jesus himself was probably a Pharisee. So there are books written about this. Jesus was basically a Pharisee. So there are lots of different Pharisees. There's two particular groups. There's Rabbi Shammai's group. This is the majority at the time of Jesus. They're very connected to the Zealots. They're very hostile to the Roman occupation, very strict and extreme. They rejected converts, and they said Gentiles can't be saved. Then there was another Rabbi Hillel. He was a minority until Yavna, which is a big conference after the destruction of the temple. And they were more connected to the Essenes, and they're more liberal and moderate, and they welcomed converts, and they said Gentiles could be saved as long as they followed 7 laws of the Code of Noah. So Jesus himself was probably a Pharisee. His teaching and practices were on the spectrum between these two rabbis. He's like a sort of moderate between these two groups of rabbis. And there were other groups as well, but those are the ones which are most recorded. So that's why Jesus said, the Pharisees said, better to say, so I would say, sometimes Jesus is recorded as saying the Pharisees said this. Actually, it'd be better to say some Pharisees said that. Okay, because there's a whole variety of different opinions. But also Jesus said, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they say. So Jesus said he respected the teachings of the Pharisees very much. And Jesus' way of teaching using parables was typical of the way that the Pharisees taught. And the freedom of interpretation meant that even if Jesus had original interpretations, he would not be accused of heresy. Because amongst the rabbis and the Pharisees, there are many different views. They didn't go around accusing people of being a heretic and having them put to death. It's just a big argument. Yeah. So even though Jesus' own interpretation may often be different, that would have just been a different view. And the advantage of Judaism at that time, people could come up with their own interpretations, and there'd be lots of discussions and arguments, and the people who came up with the best explanation are the ones who are the most popular. And Jesus came up with some of the best explanations, which is why he became extremely popular. But it wasn't heresy, it was just a different way of interpreting these things. So the traditional Jewish understanding of the Bible is for every verse in the Torah, there's 70 possible interpretations. That's great. Problem with Christianity is only one correct interpretation, whereas the Jewish way of looking at it is the 70 possible ways. Let's have a discussion, let's have an argument, let's see who comes up with the best explanation. That's what I'm interested in. So the criticisms that Jesus made of the Pharisees were typical of the criticisms they made of themselves and each other. So if you read this book here, instead of having to listen to me, you can read this, spend a week reading this book, and you can find out the same thing. That this arguments Jesus was having with other Pharisees was just typical of the kind of arguments that they had with each other. So those who were assigned the mission to protect Jesus failed to fulfill their responsibility, and thus did not succeed. As I said, it's very difficult for the people that our movement regards as they are the ones who should have protected Jesus. But Zachariah and Joseph were already dead, and then Elizabeth had taken John off into the wilderness so he doesn't get killed. So it's a very, very difficult situation. The hope of finding the only begotten daughter and celebrating the marriage supper of the Lamb with Jesus could no longer be anticipated. So as I said before, Jesus was probably married already. And the marriage supper of the Lamb is very much a Christian idea in the book of Revelation, the idea of Christ marrying the church, which we interpret differently, obviously. And I think our interpretation is better than the traditional Christian interpretation. And then one of the reasons why the Christian interpretation of Jesus Christ marries the church is because the relationship of God and the people of Israel in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is often like, God is like, Israel is my wife. It's an incredibly intense relationship. It's not just parent and child, but it's also that kind of covenant relationship. Especially read Hosea, for example, talks about it like that a lot. Anyway, so that's why I think that reading came in. So Jesus set out again to fulfill his mission. Due to the failure of the central figures to fulfill their responsibilities, Jesus embarked on a new second spiritual foundation, began his 3-year public ministry. Due to the opposition from Jewish leaders who feared Jesus and the disbelief of the Jewish people, Jesus had no choice but to walk the path of the cross. So first of all, the Jewish leaders who opposed Jesus are basically the high priests and the chief priests, because they were collaborators of Roman authorities, and that was their job. So we'll look at, again, examine these statements here. So first of all, what was Jesus' mission? So we look at Jesus' teaching. He said, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The kingdom of God is in the midst of you. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. The kingdom of God is like a grain of mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast. It is easier to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And so all Jesus is talking about here is going back to the Mosaic vision of the kingdom of God in Canaan. Yeah. So entirely here, Jesus is only talking about the kingdom of God. This is a political vision of a peaceful and just society, drawing back on the traditional Hebraic view, coming from the covenant at Sinai, The Jewish people are called to follow the Mosaic law, and by following the Mosaic law, they'd create a just and peaceful society, the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. That's what they wanted to create in Canaan. And that's what Jesus was wanting to do. As the Messiah, he came about to complete and fulfill the Mosaic vision of the kingdom of God, which, of course, is a political dimension. So if you're going to be talking about a kingdom all the time, then people are going to wonder, well, who's the king? Is it Herod? Is it the Roman emperor? Who's going to be the king in this kingdom? So Jesus always talks about the kingdom of God. So it's very much, as I said, this kind of vision. That was Jesus' mission, establishing a peaceful and just society and bringing about world peace. That was his mission. That's how he saw it. That's how he proclaimed it. So as I said, the political and social reality Jesus wanted to deal with was this. As I said before, the Jews hated the Romans, and the Romans looked down on the Jews because different religions and practices. So how to solve and prevent a catastrophe? That's what Jesus was concerned about, how to prevent this catastrophe. So Jesus then, he had a plan. Jesus was not a spiritual leader. He wasn't like a Buddha. He had a plan how we're going to solve the problems in our world today. You read Father's autobiography, where does he start his mission? What was he? He went off to. He had a revelation, but then he went to study in Japan. And who did he connect with in Japan? Other Koreans who were leaders of the opposition to the Japanese occupation. These are the people he's connecting with when he first started. He was connecting to the Korean political leaders with the expectation of trying to create that kind of just and peaceful society in Korea. You know? And of course, after the war ended and the Japanese left, then he started working differently. But always again trying to connect with these kind of people. Anyway, Jesus, the reason I started looking at Jesus' life in this way is after I read Father's autobiography. Oh, that's interesting. Maybe Jesus was trying to do what Father was trying to do. Okay, maybe I need to relook at Jesus' life and ministry in that way. So when Jesus said, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, that goes back to Exodus, the Mosaic law. So this is called the law of retaliation. So this is reciprocal justice. You know, you bump into me and I'll bump into you, then we're quits. Okay, how does it work with a bully? If you step on a bully's toe, what will he do? Sorry? Punch your eyes out. Okay, is that fair? No. If you're in a playground, it's called quits. You know, you bump into me. What's this game called tag, isn't it? That's it. That's just the same sort of thing. So it's a measure for measure retribution, tit for tat, the playground game theory. So here, victims receive the value of injury and compensation. So, for example, if you're working in a factory and under the machinery in the 19th century or 18th century, stuck your hand in the machine in the wrong place, your hand got cut off, what do? Well, in the past, you would just lose your job. Is that fair? No, so what can you do? Can you go along to say to the manager, stick your hand up, clonk? No, you don't do that either. You just sue for compensation. That is eye for an eye. So Jews never went around poking each other's eyes out, but they realized if you're going to have compensation, it should be a fair compensation, equivalent to if you lose your finger, you get a certain amount of money. You lose your hand, you get more. You lose your arm, you get more. Yes? So that's a fair compensation, which goes all the way back to the Mosaic law, an eye for an eye. It should be a fair compensation. Someone offends you, you shouldn't kill them. Yeah. So the intent behind this principle is to restrict compensation to the value of the loss, not a life for an eye. In very primitive barbaric societies, a life for an eye. You offend the leader and then you get thrown into prison just because you said something offensive. Yeah? To be honest, our country is getting more like that, this cancel mentality, cancelling people's lives. because they say something which somebody feels offended by. So then Jesus said it, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. So this is Jesus looking at the reality. If a Roman soldier treated you badly and you treated him just as badly, what's the Roman soldier going to do back to you? Even more. Yeah. It comes, what do you call it? When it gets worse and worse and worse. What's it called, Gillian? It begins EX. Escalating, thank you. So my vocabulary's all been lost. I think the surgeon must have chopped it out. Escalation, that's right. Don't want to do that. You're trying to escalate your conflict with the Romans, you're dead. That's the way it is. So what happens if you resist an evildoer? Bully, Roman soldier, the Nazis. So let's see what happened not very long ago, 5 years ago. This is the Oradour-sur-Glane massacre. So during the German occupation, the Nazi occupation of France, the general principle was 50 innocent Frenchmen were to be killed for every German soldier killed. Is that an eye for an eye? No. If you kill one German soldier, then the Germans will arrest 50 people, innocent Frenchmen, and they'll all be put to death. That's not an eye for an eye. That's the act of an evildoer and a bully. It's what goes on now, relationship between Russia and Ukraine. So what to do? So, the 9th of June, 1944, the French resistance captured SS Sturmbannführer Helmut Kampf, and the Germans heard he was being held at Oradour-sur-Glane. So in retribution, 190 men were locked in barns, shot and burned. 247 women and 207 children were locked in a church and burned. The village at Oradour-sur-Glane was partially razed to the ground. So what do you do? How do you deal with a German occupation? If you know that just by killing one German soldier, especially if it's a high-ranking officer, that's what's going to happen. What's a responsible thing to do? Difficult, isn't it? Very difficult. Why didn't you resist them? Well, if we had, this is what would have happened. Very difficult when you're living in this situation. That was the reality that the Jews were living in 2,000 years ago. That was the reality Jesus was trying to deal with to solve this problem. The French were lucky, The Americans and the British and people from all over the British Empire came and rescued them. That wasn't a possibility there. So that's the town now, still there. There's a wreck. So Jesus' political program was this. You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. How does that work? So who he's talking about here is about the Romans. So how does that work? If you retaliate, it's going to get the hurt, the anger, the resentment, and hatred. Okay, so I don't want to ask anybody to volunteer to come up here and get slapped on the right cheek. But since if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. So which is your right cheek? Just a minute. Okay, so strike someone on the right cheek, then which arm would I use? Which is the powerful, what's the strong arm? Yes, okay. Now to strike somebody on their left cheek with your right arm, what do you do? When you do it like this, you're treating that person with complete contempt. That's it. Even if people don't do it literally, I'm very good at this because I'm British. You're treating someone with complete contempt. If you do it, if you're a wife, you want to slap your husband because you do it that way. because it's an equal, yes? You do it this way, it's with contempt. So you've annoyed a German soldier, and the German soldier is annoyed with this Jew and treats this Jew with contempt. So he takes out his hand, which has got this thick, heavy leather glove with all a bit of metal things, and goes bang. And, you get knocked over onto the ground. What do you do? What do you do? Okay, so one possibility is you retaliate. You go and, because obviously it happens to you, you feel hurt. And you can get angry, and you can get resentful, and you get hatred, and you can fight the person back. Or you could think, well, I can't fight him back because he's got all this armor on and a big sword. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow him, find out where he lives. And if he comes out one night by himself, I'm going to stab him and kill him. Is that going to solve the problem? No. Okay, another possibility, you could think, oh, this Roman soldier, he's so powerful. I should make sure I bow to power. I should become subservient, servile, slavish, obsequious, fawning. Oh, Roman soldier, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I'm so sorry I bumped into you. Please forgive me. Is there anything I can do for you? You know what I mean? Oh, subservient to power. This person's more powerful than me, therefore I have to treat them in this kind of way, a fawning kind of way. Oh, this most important person's come in. Oh, let's clap this person. Yeah? Even if you don't respect them on the inside, but you realize that's what I'm going to do. Again, that's one way in which people can respect and react. So Jesus said, if anyone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other also. So what's that mean? It means you've been knocked over by this brute, and instead of getting angry and resentful, no, that's not going to solve the problem. That's just going to make it worse. If you start fawning and behaving in an obsequious kind of way, is that Roman soldier going to treat you with more respect or less respect? Less respect. Does that solve the problem? No. So neither of those two, which are the normal things that people do, solve the problem. Jesus said, stand up and turn the other cheek. So if you turn the other cheek, come on, Julian, then I have to, if you've got that cheek turned and I strike you with my right hand, I have to strike you like this, which means I have to treat you as an equal. Does a Roman soldier want to treat this Jew as an equal? No. So it's very difficult. What's a Roman soldier going to do? First of all, he's going to think, this man has got guts. I struck him and knocked him over, flat. And he stood up to take it again, but this time he just turned the other cheek. I couldn't do that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to treat him as an equal. So either I have to treat him as an equal, which humiliates me, or I just walk away. So that's what Jesus is saying. You've got to win the respect of the Roman soldier. If you behave in an angry, resentful way and try to kill them or fight back, you're going to be dead. Okay? It's not going to solve anything. If you just behave treating this person with obsequiously and, in a servile, slavish kind of way, say, oh, can I be your slave? Can I polish your shoes? All this sort of thing. That's not going to solve the problem either. The relationship's going to still be as bad. You have to win this person's respect, and you have to treat them with respect. Stand up with dignity. And I remember, I've been looking for this story for years. I read the Gulag Archipelago when I was an MFT. And everybody else, was complaining, oh, rubbish food, oh, sleeping, in sleeping bags, oh, or squashed up on this bedroom on top of each other. Oh. And I thought, man, I'm on holiday compared to what was going on in the Gulag. I'm on holiday. Anyway, one of the stories I read there, Solzhenitsyn recounting what was going on. And there's one bunch, some Soviets, communist police went to arrest somebody, and they knocked him onto the ground when they broke into his home, and he stood up, and they knocked him over again. He stood up, knocked him over again, stood up, knocked him over again. And eventually they just walked out. they had respect for this person because he wouldn't get angry and fight back against them, which is an easy way to solve the problem. They could just kill him. And he wouldn't, behave as a subservient kind of way. But he just took it with dignity. And that's what Jesus is saying, stand up with dignity. I wish I could find that story, include it in my lectures. So another thing, next Jesus said, and if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So who is Jesus talking about here? It's not an abstract teaching. He's talking here about the Roman occupation. If a Roman soldier came along, carrying his heavy, rucksack, he could demand any Jew he bumped into, man, I guess, to carry that rucksack for a mile. So supposing, you've just been sent out of your house just to pop down to the bakery to buy some bread for breakfast, and suddenly you bump into this Roman soldier. He says, right, you have to carry my luggage for a mile. Are you happy or not happy? Sorry? An inconvenience. You carry this heavy, and think, oh my God, when I get home, my wife's going to say, where have you been all this day? Why is the breakfast so late, etc., etc. Anyway, so you're walking along there, carrying this luggage, feeling angry, resentful. It's so inconvenient, so annoying that I have to carry this heavy luggage. I could probably have to go and see an osteopath or a chiropractor afterwards. It's 50 kilograms, not their kilograms in those days, 100 pounds. And, you can imagine them walking along with a bad face, angry face, and counting out every step. And when you'd done your 1,300 and something steps, you'd put the luggage on the ground and walk home. So if you behaved like that, would the Roman soldier have respected you more or less? Just normal. He would have expected someone who has to carry my luggage to carry it unwillingly, and I would expect him to react in that way. This is exactly how I would react if I was in this situation. I wouldn't be doing it happily. So Jesus said, go also the 2nd mile. So instead of saying, okay, now I've done my mile, say to the Roman soldier, actually, I've got a bit of time on my hands, I'll carry it for another mile. Interesting. But then the important point here is, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. So how are you going to love this Roman soldier who's carrying your luggage? No, you're carrying his luggage. How are you going to love this person? Jesus didn't say you have to like the person. You don't have to like them. But you have to love them. You have to care about them. And so if you love this Roman soldier who's asked you to carry your luggage, you could say, where have you come from? You just got off the train or off the donkey or whatever. Where did you come from? Have you been here long? Who's your commanding officer? Where do you come? Have you got a family at home? Take an interest into this person. Are you happy to come to this country? Just start asking this person questions about their life. Take an interest. Care about this person means you ask and you're interested in their life and asking questions about all sorts of things. And the Roman soldier would have thought, my God, nobody's ever taken this much interest in me before, ever. This person really cares about me, he's interested in me. And, and then he wants to carry my luggage for an extra mile. And getting into this kind of conversation with this Roman soldier, the Roman soldier would have realized, actually, Jews are incredibly good people. And the way this Roman soldier would have looked at this Jew would have been completely transformed and changed. These are really good people. Actually, I wish I had a friend like this, other than somebody who just go and get drunk with me or get into a fight with me. I wish I had a friend who took this much interest in my life and who cared this much about me. So his relationship with this person would have been transformed. He realized Jews aren't the way that people say they are. Actually, they're really good people. And they're it's like a counselor, like a psychiatrist. Jews invented psychiatry. And, then the end of the 2 miles, Jesus said, love your enemies, take an interest in them, care about them, see if you can solve any psychological or other kind of problems they might be having. How do you get on with your commanding officer? Okay, he treats you like this, or maybe this is how you should try and deal with your commanding officer if he treats you so badly or something. And then pray for those who persecute you. So at the end of the 2 miles, Jesus would have said, would you like me to pray for you? And what do you think the Roman soldier would say? Yes, please bless me, pray for me. And then he would have prayed for this Roman soldier and blessed this Roman soldier. And the Roman soldier would have said, why don't we meet up in Starbucks next week? I want a friend like you. That makes sense? And this is the way to change the relationship between the Romans and the Jews. That was Jesus' political project and plan. And that's why I think that story I read out earlier that Josephus wrote about Pilate and the images. I think that was those people who put into practice what Jesus taught. Yeah, be willing to not to react. It's like turning the other cheek, actually giving them your throat. It's even worse. But you know what I mean? I think there were people there who were trying to put into practice what Jesus was teaching to solve this problem. And I think Jesus is the one who is the author and leader of all these kind of things. As Josephus indicated, when the next sentence after that story, he said Jesus was there. Anyway, that's my reading of it. And I think it's really profound and beautiful. That's the way to solve it, these kind of problems. Very practical. And you might wonder, well, did Jesus make all this up? No. All Jesus was doing, he was applying the Mosaic law in his own time. Jesus was a Jew, a follower of Moses, trying to put into practice what Moses himself taught. Goodness, time's going so fast. So Moses said, do not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove or reason with your neighbor frankly, so you will not bear sin because of him. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Okay, so supposing somebody hurts you, how do you feel? They say something that hurts you, offends you, how do you feel? Upset. And you can actually feel upset, and you can feel this hurt for months and years and generations, this resentment, yeah? It's destructive of people's lives, of families and communities. So Moses said, do not hate your brother in your heart. In other words, do not feel resentment. Reprove or tell your neighbor frankly, so you will not bear sin because of him. So it means if someone hurts you, say, that hurt. So when you say that, you're just being open, honest and transparent. That hurt. And then you're putting it back in that person's court. That person might not even realize they hurt you. They might not even realize that what they said offended you. They just carry on and wonder, why does this person feel so bad towards me? I have no idea. Okay? So the first thing is, frankly, honestly, just tell the person, actually, what you said hurt because of this, this, and this. And then the person who said it, if they're a decent person, they say, oh, I had no idea. I didn't realize. I'm so sorry. And then you forgive each other and you make it up. Yeah? That's what Moses taught. But if you don't do that, you will reprove your brothers frankly, so you will not bear sin because of him. In other words, you're the one who got resentment, not that person. That person just carrying on oblivious, has got no idea it made you feel resentful, or so you're the one that's becoming sinful and full of resentment and full of hatred, and might later on want to get your revenge back, and say there's something, So you become the sinner, not that person. You're bearing the sin. So do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone. That doesn't solve the problem. Among your people, but love your neighbors, you love yourself. But it's also the idea here, not just if you feel offended, but if you see somebody mistreating somebody else, what should you do? You should think, oh, okay, that was wrong. That was unfair. That was unjust. I saw it happen. What should I do? Then think about, okay, how can I let that person know that what they said was wrong and unfair and unjust, and they should go and apologize and make it up? If you don't do that, if you see an injustice taking place, you don't get involved and try to solve that problem in an intelligent and sensible way, you yourself become a sinner, because it's a sin of omission. So you didn't get involved and do something which you ought to do. You just let that crime go uncommented upon. So people sometimes wonder, well, why did I write that statement about Sinchal? That's my responsibility. Not to do that would be irresponsible, and I'd be sinning. It's up to him how he plays back. Okay, so that's, any questions about this? Oh, I forgot to say, any questions, ask them any time. And secondly, I don't expect you to believe everything I'm saying, or to agree with everything I'm saying. If you do agree, will believe everything I'm saying, I'll be really shocked. I'm just here to just open stuff up so you can think about all these things and come to your own conclusions. Okay, so let's see what's next. Okay, so I'll come back. Should I come at this now? Yeah. Okay, because of the failures of the central figures, the only begotten daughter was not born. I'll come to that. Jesus could not hold the marriage supper of the Lamb. Originally, Jesus was supposed to meet the only begotten daughter, become true parents through the holy marriage. If the central figures had fulfilled their responsibilities, an only begotten daughter would have been born. On top of that foundation, the failure of the central figure and the Jewish people to fulfill their responsibilities prevented the birth of the only begotten daughter and the ideal of true parent from being realized. Well, as I said before, I don't believe in only begotten sons or only begotten daughters, because that's contrary to the teachings of Judaism and contrary to teachings of Islam, and God doesn't beget. But anyway, at the same time, I think there were women born alive at the time of Jesus who could have been Jesus' bride, and I think basically from the historical record, as I understand it, Jesus actually did get married to Mary of Magdalene and probably had a family. And if you want to find out more about this, just go and read the Dan Brown's book, because it's anyway. And if this is oops, wrong way. So this is a Jewish marriage, typical Jewish marriage at the same time at the time of Jesus. This is how Jews understand marriage. Jewish marriage is a union sanctified by God. It goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 2. This is a marriage of union sanctified by God. Marital obligations, therefore, are not merely personal, but have implications for universal harmony. So there's a vision here that through marriage and through the conjugal love, this actually makes peace and harmony within a family, within a community, within a society, and within the world. The existence of God as a silent partner in Jewish marriage endows relationship with sanctity and solemn commitment. So we talk about the four-position foundation: God, man, husband, wife, children. God, that's what Jews believe. God is present in the marriage, because the marriage is a place where God's love is present and manifested. And that's why marriage then becomes something very sanctified, a solemn commitment. So when a person gets married, you're married the Son of God. When you get married, you're married a daughter of God. You're marrying God's prince and God's princess. So that's why within Judaism, you should always treat husband and wife equals. That's why in the Ten Commandments, it says you should honor your father and your mother. Not just honor your father and your mother. Right from page 1 in the Bible is the equality of masculinity and femininity. Because God created man as image and likeness, male and female. They're equal. And the Ten Commandments, and there's a huge amount of respect for women in the Hebrew Bible. And Judaism views marriage as the basis of human companionship and the cornerstone of Jewish community, as the venue for fulfillment of the biblical commandment to be fruitful and multiply. And during the wedding, the couple receives 7 blessings from God. So did Jesus get married? I think so. Did he receive God's blessing on his marriage? I think so. Was that the model of the marriage supper of the Lamb? Yes, I would say yes. Unfortunately, because of what happened, Jesus was killed. Things didn't work out the way in which they could have done and they should have done. Okay, so we'll move on. Do you have a break now? Anybody here want a break? A cup of tea, cup of coffee? Or do you want me to carry on talking for another hour? We need a break, yeah. Hmm?